Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I'm a 40-year-old woman who thought her biggest worry today would be choosing between brand name and generic cereal. What started as a routine trip to Walmart turned into something that still gives me nightmares. As a dental hygienist at a small practice downtown, my life is pretty ordinary. My husband travels for work, so I'm usually the one handling grocery runs and errands. Today was supposed to be simple. Grab some groceries for the week, maybe pick up a birthday card for my sister, the usual stuff. I've been putting off this shopping trip for days. Our fridge was practically empty, and my two daughters had been complaining about the lack of snacks. So after work, I drove straight to Walmart, determined to knock out everything on my list. The store was busy, but not terrible. I managed to find everything I needed without too much hassle. After loading up my cart with groceries, I headed out to the parking lot. The sun was starting to set, and I was already thinking about what to make for dinner. That's when I saw her, an elderly woman struggling with her shopping cart near the row of parked cars. The poor lady looked to be in her 70s, maybe 80s. She was having trouble controlling her cart, which clearly had a wobbly wheel. I watched as she tried to guide it toward what I assumed was her car, then disaster struck. One of the wheels completely gave out, sending the cart rolling sideways. It bumped right into a shiny red sedan. That's when Karen emerged from the driver's seat. Karen was probably in her 50s with that haircut that screams, "I want to speak to your manager." She was dressed in expensive-looking clothes and had this look on her face like the world owed her something. The moment she saw the tiny scratch on her car door, she exploded. Karen started yelling at the elderly woman, asking if she was kidding and demanding to know what she had done to her car. The elderly woman immediately started apologizing, explaining that the wheel had broken and she couldn't control the cart. She promised to pay for any damage that was done. But Karen wasn't having any of it. She shouted about how this was a brand new car and asked if the old lady had any idea how much it would cost to fix. The elderly woman was clearly shaken up. Her hands were trembling as she tried to examine the barely visible mark on Karen's car. I could see she was fighting back tears. The elderly woman suggested they exchange insurance information, but Karen refused. She complained about having to deal with insurance companies because some old lady couldn't handle a shopping cart. She kept going on about how unbelievable the whole situation was. I couldn't just stand there and watch this bullying continue. The scratch was so minor, you had to squint to see it. And here was this woman making an elderly lady feel terrible over an obvious accident. I walked over, hoping to calm things down. I tried to tell Karen that maybe we could all take a breath and pointed out that it was clearly an accident with minimal damage. Karen whipped around to face me, and I immediately regretted getting involved. Her eyes were blazing with anger. Karen demanded to know who had asked for my opinion and told me to mind my own business. I tried to explain that there was no need to yell at the elderly woman since these things happen. That's when Karen completely lost it. Without warning, she shoved me hard in the chest. I stumbled backward, completely caught off guard. I've never been in a physical altercation in my life, and the shock of being pushed left me speechless. Karen told me to back off and said this didn't concern me. She turned back to the elderly woman and called her an old hag. She threatened that she was next and said she was getting something from her car that would teach us both a lesson. My blood ran cold. Karen walked back to her sedan and popped the trunk. She rummaged around for a few seconds before pulling something out, keeping it hidden behind her back as she walked back towards us. The elderly woman grabbed my arm, and I could feel her shaking. I had no idea what Karen was planning, but every instinct told me we were in serious danger. This had escalated way beyond a parking lot disagreement. Just then, I heard the low rumble of an engine and saw a police cruiser slowly making its way through the parking lot. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Maybe they were just doing a routine patrol, or maybe someone had called them after seeing the commotion. Either way, I was grateful they showed up when they did. Karen noticed the police car too, and her whole demeanor changed. The confident anger was replaced by something that looked like panic. That's when I realized she was hiding more than just whatever she'd grabbed from her car. But instead of surrendering or trying to explain the situation, Karen did something that still doesn't make sense to me. She revealed what she'd been hiding, a handgun, and opened fire on the police cruiser. The first shot shattered the windshield. The sound was deafening, and chaos erupted instantly. People started screaming and running in every direction. I grabbed the elderly woman and pulled her down behind a parked truck, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Karen kept firing shot after shot, trying to hit the officers who were trapped in their damaged vehicle. I peeked around the truck and saw the cops struggling to get out while staying low to avoid the bullets. Then something straight out of an action movie happened. The officer in the driver's seat must have decided they couldn't wait for backup. The engine roared to life and the police cruiser lurched forward, heading straight for Karen. She was so focused on reloading that she didn't see it coming until the last second. The car slammed into her, sending her flying across the asphalt. The gun skittered away, and Karen lay moaning on the ground, clearly hurt but alive. The officers jumped out, weapons drawn, and carefully approached Karen. One kicked the gun away while the other called for backup and an ambulance. Within minutes, the parking lot was swarming with police cars and emergency vehicles. I stayed crouched behind that truck with the elderly woman until an officer told us it was safe to come out. We were both shaking and could barely speak coherently when they asked for our statements. It took a while to piece together what had happened, but eventually I learned that Karen wasn't just your average entitled customer having a bad day. She had multiple outstanding warrants and a rap sheet longer than my grocery list. Drug charges, assault, theft, you name it. When she saw those police lights, she must have realized her luck had finally run out. The officers told me that Karen had been on the run for months, using fake identification and moving from place to place. A simple traffic stop or background check would have landed her back in prison, so she was desperate to avoid any contact with law enforcement. The elderly woman was too shaken to drive, so I asked one of the officers if they could make sure she got home safely. They arranged for her son to pick her up and said they'd help her retrieve her car later. Before she left, she hugged me and thanked me for trying to help her. I felt terrible that such a sweet woman had been put through this nightmare. When I finally made it home, I barely made it through the front door before breaking down completely. Seeing my two daughters watching TV in the living room, safe and happy, made me realize how close I'd come to never seeing them again. I hugged them so tight they complained, but I couldn't let go. Later, I did some research online about what I'd witnessed. Apparently, police officers can use their vehicles as weapons in extreme situations where lives are in immediate danger. It's not something they take lightly, but when facing an armed suspect who's actively shooting, they're trained to use whatever means necessary to protect themselves and civilians. Karen ended up with a broken leg, some cuts and bruises, and a whole lot of new charges added to her existing ones. The hospital patched her up before she was transferred to jail, where she'll probably be staying for a very long time. I'm 30 years old and have a successful job in the heart of the city. My husband and I have been married for 3 years, and we've built what I thought was a solid life together. We both have demanding jobs, but we've always managed to balance everything pretty well. I handle most of the housework because I'm naturally better at it, and when my long work hours keep me late, my husband steps up and makes sure there's a warm meal waiting for me when I get home. Everything changed about 6 months ago when my father-in-law passed away suddenly. My mother-in-law was devastated and couldn't handle living alone. My husband's brother and his wife decided to move in with her to provide support and companionship during this difficult time. At first, it seemed like the perfect solution, but family dynamics are never that simple. My mother-in-law fell into a deep depression after losing her husband, and the living situation with my brother-in-law's family became tense. There were constant disagreements and arguments that made their home feel like a battlefield. My husband started visiting more often to help mediate and keep the peace. I took time off work to support my mother-in-law through her grief. Slowly, with everyone's help, she began to recover and regain her strength. But when she got better, something unexpected happened. She started becoming extremely strict with my brother-in-law's 3-year-old daughter. She would yell at the little girl for the smallest things, like not holding her spoon correctly or refusing to eat vegetables. My sister-in-law had a more modern approach to parenting and believed in giving children freedom to express themselves. This created a huge conflict between her and my mother-in-law. The poor little girl became caught in the middle of their different parenting philosophies. My brother-in-law was stuck trying to keep the peace between his wife and his mother. The situation got worse when my mother-in-law started overstepping boundaries in other ways. She threw away my sister-in-law's clothes without permission, claiming they were old and inappropriate. Even more shocking, she got rid of the little girl's favorite outfits for ridiculous reasons. Then came the final straw. One day, my sister-in-law left her daughter with my mother-in-law for a short time while she went grocery shopping. When she returned, she found that my mother-in-law had cut the little girl's hair extremely short without asking anyone. My sister-in-law demanded to know what had happened to her daughter's hair. My mother-in-law calmly explained that she had given the child a proper haircut because her hair grew too fast anyway. She told my sister-in-law that she was just helping and that she should be grateful. My sister-in-law was furious and told her that she had no right to cut her daughter's hair without permission. The little girl was crying and my sister-in-law was beyond angry. When my brother-in-law came home and saw what happened, he exploded. He yelled at his mother, telling her she couldn't just cut his daughter's hair without asking them first. My mother-in-law argued back, saying she was the grandmother and knew what was best for the child. My brother-in-law told her that wasn't how things worked. My husband rushed over to try to mediate the situation, but I could see he was taking his mother's side. When I expressed my concerns about his mother's behavior, he defended her actions. He told me she was just trying to help and thought she knew what was best. I argued that she was overstepping boundaries and couldn't just do whatever she wanted with other people's children and belongings. My husband insisted that she had been through a lot and we needed to be understanding. I watched my husband's support actually encourage his mother's bad behavior. She felt justified in her actions because her son was backing her up. The situation became impossible, and my brother-in-law and his family decided they had to move out. They found a place in the countryside where they could live peacefully away from all the drama. Meanwhile, my marriage was suffering. My husband and I were constantly disagreeing about his mother's behavior, and I felt like he was choosing her over our relationship. Our once strong partnership was falling apart. Then one evening, after a long and exhausting day at work, I came home to find a surprise waiting for me. My husband had moved his mother into our house without discussing it with me first. I asked him what she was doing there. He told me his mother wanted to spend time with us and he thought it would be nice. I couldn't believe he had moved someone into our home without talking to me about it first. He said she was family and needed our support. I tried to explain that this was our space and we should have discussed this together. He called me selfish and reminded me that she had been through a lot. I couldn't believe he was dismissing my feelings so easily. When days turned into weeks, my mother-in-law's presence in our home created constant tension. She started rearranging our furniture, throwing away my belongings she didn't like, and trying to control how I ran my own household. She told me my curtains were hideous and that she was getting rid of them. I explained that those were my curtains and asked her not to touch my things. She said she was just trying to help make the place look better. I told her I liked my home the way it was. She then insulted me, saying I had no sense of style. When I complained to my husband, he continued to take her side. He said she was just trying to help and that I was being too sensitive. I pointed out that she was throwing away my belongings and insulting me in my own home. He insisted she meant well and that I needed to be more patient. I felt completely unsupported and disrespected in my own marriage. I took a day off work to think about my situation and went to a local coffee shop to clear my head. I texted my husband asking him to meet me there after work so we could have an honest conversation about our relationship. I waited for 2 hours, but he never showed up. His absence spoke volumes about where his priorities lay. When I got home that night, I realized I had to make a difficult decision. Over the next few days, I started quietly consulting with lawyers and packing my belongings. The process was emotionally draining, but I knew I couldn't continue living in a situation where my feelings and needs were completely ignored. The legal proceedings moved forward, and eventually, my divorce was finalized. I found a cozy apartment where I could rebuild my life on my own terms. To keep me company, I adopted a cat that I named Luna. Her playful antics and affectionate presence reminded me that healing and new beginnings were possible. I'm a member of this camp community. It's one of those places that feels like stepping back in time when kids could actually be kids. We've got a beautiful lake, a couple of pools, a decent restaurant, and it's safe enough that my 10-year-old can run around with friends until dinner time without me having to worry about anything worse than scraped knees. I bought into this place for that freedom. When I was young, I spent summers at my grandparents' lake house where we'd disappear for hours building forts in the woods or catching frogs by the water. These days, most kids are glued to screens or need constant supervision. Here, though, it's different. Kids still play outside until the street lights come on. Our cabin sits on this small cul-de-sac that's mostly grass instead of pavement. The community designed it this way so families could set up games like cornhole, let kids ride bikes safely, and have barbecues without worrying about traffic. It's become the heart of our little neighborhood, especially during busy weekends when everyone's around. This July 4th weekend was no exception. The camp was packed because everyone brings guests for the holiday. Cars were everywhere, and finding parking spots became a bit of a challenge. Still, most people know the rules and figure it out without much trouble. My kid and the neighbor boy were having a great time playing catch in our grassy area. These two have been best friends since we moved here, and watching them play reminds me of my own childhood. They were using a tennis ball, nothing that could really hurt anything, just tossing it back and forth and practicing their catching skills. Everything was going fine until the neighbor kid missed a throw. The ball bounced once and gently tapped against a car that was parked right at the edge of our grass area. I heard the soft thunk from where I was sitting on my porch and looked over to see both boys freeze like they'd just broken something valuable. Before either of them could even move to get the ball, this guy comes storming out of nowhere, yelling at the kids about damaging his car. The kids looked terrified. My son started backing away while the neighbor boy just stood there with his mouth open. I walked over and told the guy to hold on, explaining that it was just an accident and asking if I could take a look to see if there was any damage. The other kid's dad also came outside when he heard the yelling. We both wanted to handle this reasonably. Kids will be kids, and if they actually damage something, of course we'd make it right. The other dad told the angry guy that we were happy to take care of anything that got damaged and asked him to show us where the ball hit. That's when this guy really lost it. He started pointing all over his car like it had been through a demolition derby. He showed us what he claimed were dents and a huge scratch, then pointed to a crack in his windshield, saying our kids had just caused thousands of dollars in damage. I looked where he was pointing and had to bite my tongue. The car was clearly old and had obviously been through some rough times. There were multiple dents and scratches that looked like they'd been there for years, plus a windshield crack that ran halfway across the glass and was definitely not fresh. I told him I thought he was mistaken and that these marks looked like they'd been there for a while, explaining that the ball had barely touched his car. He got even angrier and asked if I was calling him a liar, saying that our kids had just destroyed his car. The other dad backed me up, saying that we saw what happened and it was just a light tap from a tennis ball, pointing out that there was no way that could have caused all the damage he was claiming. The guy kept pointing at every imperfection on his vehicle, getting more and more worked up. It was obvious he was trying to get us to pay for damage that had nothing to do with our kids. He told us he didn't care what we thought we saw and that this was going to cost him a fortune to fix, demanding that we pay for every penny of it. I told him we'd pay for any actual damage our kids caused, but we weren't going to pay to restore his car to mint condition. That's when he threatened to call the park safety office, saying they would make us pay for everything if we weren't going to be reasonable. That's when I smiled. See, I know the rules of this community pretty well. I've been here long enough to understand exactly what areas are designated for parking and which ones aren't. And this guy's car was definitely not in a legal spot. I told him that sounded like a great idea and that we should definitely call the safety office. The guy looked smug, like he'd just won some kind of victory. He pulled out his phone and made the call while we all stood there waiting. The kids had retreated to a safe distance but were still watching the whole drama unfold. About 10 minutes later, the park safety officer showed up in his golf cart. He's a good guy who's been working here for years and knows all the residents. He listened patiently while the angry guest explained his version of events, claiming that our kids had destroyed his car with their ball and demanding that we pay for everything. The officer said he wanted to take a look at where this happened. He walked around the car, examining the supposed damage. Then he started looking at the ground around the vehicle and checking his handbook. The officer asked the guy how long he'd been parked there. The man replied that he'd been there for 2 days with no problems until now, asking what that had to do with anything. The officer nodded and flipped through a few more pages in his book. Then he explained that he could see what the problem was. He told the guy that the entire grassy area was designated as a no parking zone and that he couldn't leave his vehicle there overnight or for extended periods. The guy started changing color. He asked what the officer was talking about, claiming it was just grass and that nobody had told him he couldn't park there. The officer explained that the parking regulations were clearly posted at the entrance to the community and that his host should have told him of the rules. But regardless, he said, the guy had been illegally parked for 2 days. I asked what that meant for the situation with the kids. The officer explained that if the vehicle had been in a designated parking area, like it should have been, this incident never would have happened. He pointed out that the kids were playing in an area designed for recreation, and the car shouldn't have been there in the first place. The officer then turned back to the angry guest and told him he was going to have to issue a citation for illegal parking and asked him to move his vehicle immediately to a proper parking spot. The guy went from red to purple. He stood there sputtering while the officer wrote out the ticket. He protested that this was ridiculous and that he was a guest, claiming the officer couldn't give him a ticket. The officer explained that the parking rules applied to everyone in the community, including guests, and that his host was responsible for making sure he understood and followed the regulations. The officer handed over the ticket and got back in his golf cart. He told the guy he had 30 minutes to move his vehicle to a legal parking spot and that if it was still there after that, he'd receive another citation. The guy stood there holding his ticket, looking like he wanted to say something but clearly realizing he'd lost this battle. He got in his car without another word and drove off to find a real parking spot. The other dad commented that it had worked out better than expected. I agreed, saying that sometimes the rules actually work in your favor. The kids came back over once the coast was clear, still looking a little shaken by the whole experience. My kid asked if they were in trouble. I told him that they weren't in trouble at all, and that they'd been playing exactly where they were supposed to play. I explained that the man had parked his car where he wasn't supposed to. We didn't see the guy for the rest of the weekend. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.